que no hablo mucho español. Somos vecinos, porque soy americana. Es una vergüenza que no hablo español. So I'm sorry, that's my greatest regret of being here in Mexico City. I've loved being here. I want to say thank you to everybody, especially to Sofia and Nerviosa, and all the people behind the scenes that have made this day possible. Andres, of course, our host, but also Rodrigo, Lot, Alex, everybody who's made this day so lovely for us. So it'd be nice if we could all give them a hand. That'd be great. So it is my pleasure to be here today. I'm an historian of American history, and today I want to spend some time talking about what we believe we know about the past, why we think we know what we believe we know about the past, and how that idea is fundamentally political, how it's fundamentally about power. The stories that get told, the stories that don't get told. I teach at a beautiful college up in Massachusetts. It's a liberal arts college, which means in the United States context, I focus on undergraduates only. So students from age 18 to 22, and I love it. I love it because it gives me a chance to really be part of young people's formation as citizens, as thinking people, as critical people, who hopefully will go into the world and make a change. I always say that I'm more interested really in who my students are going to be when they're 40 years old than who they are at 18. Because what I hope this education does is give them the tools, the critical thinking tools, the moral compass to go into the world and be brave and to do good and to be part of a community. Now, when many of you hear about history, this might be your reaction. Some of you may have had a history professor who droned on and on. It was one damn thing after another, fact, date, name. My mother-in-law is a nurse, and she calls history gossip about dead people. This doesn't make me feel very good in the eyes of my mother-in-law. But really, history is about more than that. The thing about history that's important for you to know is that people, often politicians, leaders, parents, people in positions of authority will use the term history, la historia, history, to have weight, to have authority. But history is not the same thing as the past. That's the first thing I want you to remember today. The past is something that happened. History is something else. So why do you think I say that? What do you think the distinction is between history and the past? Anybody? Come on. Dígame.
Because history is constructed.
Because history is constructed. And by whom is it constructed? By the people doing the selecting and the interpreting. Where are you? Who said that? Bravo, wherever you are. A+ for today's class. Bravo! Come on up, join me. So, the past is here. History is over here. And in between we have people, subjects, with interests, the power to select, the power to organize, the power to decide what gets told and what doesn't get told. And why that matters is because in the process, certain interests are served, certain people benefit, and other people don't. Other people are disfranchised or disempowered through that. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. Where most people encounter their history, professores, see, is in heritage spaces, right? So I want to also make a distinction between history and heritage today. Heritage, well, we'll talk about history first. It's the study of the past, how something comes to be. We look at how people make choices, how individuals use their agency to affect change. It tends to be a discipline of the head. We look at evidence from a broad range of sources, and we vet them, which means we weigh them for their accuracy and their precision. We're very interested in multiple perspectives, right, when we write history, to try to weigh what is the most accurate and precise version. We like ambiguity, and we love argument, right? Historians love to argue. We love a good argument. And if it's an argument, it means there's no one single truth, right? There is no truth. If it's the truth, there's no argument. Everyone agrees, right? So it's about being critical, whereas heritage, on the other hand, is about this set of inherited traditions or beliefs that you just know in your heart and in your gut to be true. It is often how something just is. It feels natural, it feels normal, it feels true to you, even if the evidence doesn't necessarily support it. Often it's around treasured objects, historic sites, artifacts. and there are group values attached, and this is where it becomes about politics and power. When one group decides, this is the story of Mexico. Ooh, right? That's a fight waiting to happen. There are a lot of stories of Mexico, right? That one group decides they can control that narrative, that's when you have heritage at work. So it's largely gut, largely heart, and it's largely narrative versus argumentative. So we're going to talk about these today, looking at some examples of moments in the public sphere, in public history, exhibits, the landscape, monuments, where this attempt to tell a single story is complicated, right? The attempt to have heritage mean one thing for all people is challenged. So, when I say memory war, the name of my talk, what do I mean? I'm really not as interested in the wars themselves. Today I'm talking about World War II and the American War in Vietnam. Did anyone notice what I just said? How do I describe the American War in Vietnam? How do you normally hear that phrase in North America?
A disaster.
Well, sí, es verdad. But how is it usually as a phrase? In the United States, we call it the Vietnam War. I said the American War in Vietnam. Rhetorically, that's a very different thing. Vietnam, to North Americans in the US, is the war. Whereas in fact, Vietnam is a country, and a people, and a whole long history, right? So even the way that you choose to use your words. For example, when I talk about enslavement, I don't say the word slave owner or slave holder. Those are domesticated, gentle terms. I use the verb enslaver. These are people making choices to enslave other people. I also never use the word slave. I say enslaved person, because first and foremost, an enslaved person is a person. And if you reduce them to just their adjective of enslavement, you reduce their humanity. And that's a political move through words. And that's a dangerous thing in terms of citizenship and democracy and power. So, we're not going to talk about the words themselves. We're going to talk about what I like to call the messy, imaginative aftermath. That is the cultural echoes of these two wars in the landscape. So I'm going to have to move quickly here, so run with me. We're going to be in the US, we're going to head over to Vietnam for a while, we're going to go over to some other countries. So, where do we find these places? We find it in public-facing sites, like historic sites, museums, popular films, documentaries. And this is where most people get their history again. Hold on to that idea. So, why does it matter? It matters because this is about fundamentally power. Who controls the representations of the past? Right? Power. Second idea is what stories get told and how do they get told? Whose don't? It's about citizenship. And finally, it's about justice and democracy. Where I teach at a Jesuit school. We very seriously take the notion of social justice as central to our curriculum. So it's always about justice. So let's get into it. First idea, symbols are not neutral. Symbols are not neutral. Symbols have all sorts of meaning for the people who elevate those symbols to have power in the culture. This is an example of a painting from the 1850s in the United States of an event that took place after the reading of the Declaration of Independence in New York in 1776. After the reading of the Declaration of Independence, a group of people, of colonists, pulled down a statue of George III. This is this great revolutionary moment. What's interesting is that that statue then became a stand-in for the tyranny of the British monarchy and the Americans' colonial experience, but also that this painting is made right before the American Civil War, is regurgitating that symbol, this notion of tyranny, right, of power. The power of the state to impose rules around enslavement, or the power of one group of states to secede from the American Union. Symbols are not neutral. This might be familiar to many of you from the war in Iraq, right? One of the first things that was in American media was this image of the US Marines pulling down a massive statue of Saddam Hussein. Interestingly, in much of the media, the US Marines doing the pulling were edited out of the image so that it seems as if just naturally by the presence of US forces, this regime is toppled. When in fact, it's not passive voice. The Marines are pulling this down. Another way that picture was edited was with many Iraqis in the foreground, as if it were the Iraqi people themselves pulling down the statue. Not that some of them weren't pleased with it, but the ways in which those visuals, kind of like what Sam talked about earlier today, the image the camera wants to capture is also an act of power. I am delighted to talk about it, if any of you are interested, the problem currently in the United States around Confederate culture, the culture of the Southern Confederate States and these statues that litter the landscape, that represent a certain vision of the South, a certain vision of white supremacy, and a certain vision of enslavement, around which we're having a lot of debate. I'm not sure, are you aware of that going on at all? It's a very big question, and it's a question around representation that's also relevant in this context. This is also a post-colonial society, right? And it's interesting to see in my 3 days here the ways in which different narratives privilege certain Spanish and Eurocentric perspectives of Mexican history and other indigenous perspectives of Mexican history. What's interesting about those monuments, when people say tearing them down is erasing history, you're erasing history by tearing down these monuments. I say no, actually you're not, because those monuments were themselves a form of revising history. And if you see this slide here of when those statues were mostly put up, they were put up in the aftermath of the Civil War when the United States, North and South and West, was coming together under the banner of white supremacy, right? This is not just a Southern US thing, it's a national thing. So they really are objects of a particular period, and the question becomes, do they deserve to have a place of privilege in the contemporary political environment? Or are they artifacts of different values that we want to push into a museum context to understand why they were created as these pernicious artifacts? But today I want to talk about historical memory, which is something I work on, this idea of how stories are told. I write a lot about the American South, about gender and sexuality, about enslavement. This image here is a slave market in Charleston, South Carolina, which was a center of the domestic and international slave trade in the United States. That is a space that has had a narrative that is absolutely favorable to elite white perspectives on the past. Elite white perspectives on the past. This article that I worked on, this project that I worked on with this museum, was about where do you tell the story? Where do you start the story of American enslavement? If you started in a plantation house, you've already domesticated it. You've already made enslavement about a family, about relationships. But if you start it in the slave market, in the place where human beings were measured and sold, people with a price, you have to tell a different story of slavery, correct? You must. It's a different story. So today I want to talk about World War II and the American War in Vietnam, and I want to give you a couple different frames of reference so that when you're out in the public sphere consuming historical heritage work, you're more critical.